This episode is supported by Enscape, empowering your design workflow by turning your BIM model into an immersive 3D experience.
Yeah, so we were talking in the last, pretty sure, yeah, it was the last episode. I don't know, everything's running together.
When we were on opposite sides of the world. Now coming to you from the warm microphones of the Archispeak HQ studio. Yeah.
Studios.
Yeah. They don't know that.
Yeah, true. We're in the same room. We're looking at each other eye to eye.
Right.
No, we had talked about the value of the face-to-face meetings, and trust me, they absolutely, because I don't know if I had made this comment before the meetings or after the meetings, but you and I were trying to arrange when a time was that you and I could have these calls before you flew out. So I'm pretty sure what I'm about to comment on was definitely after you and I recorded.
Okay.
And so we've had all of these meetings, and all of these meetings have been through Teams, cameras off, can't pick up any facial expressions, and we had talked about that. And so on the final day that we were there, we were all face to face, and a couple of the project designers from the client side, they had grabbed our printed out version of the floor plans, and they're kind of flipping through them, and they're sitting side by side, and I'm across the table, kind of at the end. It's this big, long conference room table, and I see the looks on their face. And of course, these are the looks on the face that, again, you never pick up when you are looking at them, when you're looking at a screen that has a bunch of names, but no faces.
Right.
And so I looked over there and I saw the slight grimaces on their face of what's going on here kind of thing. And so I looked over to them and I'm like, let me hear it. And they were kind of whoa, what? And I was just well, I see some concern on your face. And so I'm just curious, what are your thoughts? What's going on in your head? And this is a good as time as any for us to go ahead and have this conversation to make sure that before I leave that we're good. And they're like, oh, that's fantastic. I mean, it was almost like this sigh of relief. It's just oh, we get to talk to you. Yes, you get to talk to me, and we actually
get to do this thing.
We can actually engage together. And so they came closer, and I came closer, and we started talking, and we were talking specifically about a specific a prayer room that is definitely something that we don't understand the way it properly works.
Yeah, I got it. Not a typical piece of program in your normal typical project.
Not a typical piece of program in a typical Western program. And so obviously I wanted to pick their brains on exactly what makes a good functioning prayer room with all of the adjacency spaces and things like that. And so they sketch it out. And we're talking back and forth about how it would work within the spaces that we've allocated for it. And we came up with a pretty decent layout that I thought worked both with the current layout. I can't even begin to tell you how, I don't know if we've ever really talked about how when we present these photorealistic renderings in an early phase, say concept, and getting locked into those and saying, this is what it needs to be. But
we've talked about that a lot. Yeah. Going that people pick up on things that you're not ready for them to pick up on yet, because it doesn't matter to you, but it's everything to them. They're that color purple, man, I hate that color. It's it doesn't have to be purple. And they're but I really hate that purple. It brings up childhood memories. Yeah.
So let's take it one step further and say that because of who the client is and how everything goes about, if they approve the CGIs in concept design, that is what they are expecting to see once it's constructed.
Yeah, but expectations are just disappointments in the making.
No. no. I can't even stress to you that, like, for us, it's just a primer to a conversation. It's like, okay, here is the idea of what we would like to do. No,
they're like, that's what we're getting. It's
this
done.
is set in stone. And
right. That is the downfall to
for you to go to this particular client and say, hey, here's what, here's what we're thinking, but it might change. No,
you're right.
It won't change. It will not change.
There is a line that you cross at some point where that is the expectation, instead of this is what if, this is what could be, this is a conversation, this is a work in progress, this is a living document. At some point you cross the line, for sure.
Yeah. So,
and for some people it's earlier than others, like you're saying. Like it's you still feel like you're really early on, and it's like, nope, that's it. From now on, that decision has been made. Let's make other decisions.
Eventually, when I'm allowed to like talk a little bit more freely about this project, maybe I'll come a little under. You will understand exactly why. Like when you say sometimes you're like unrealistic client, expectations, and then you hear like who the client is, you're like, oh, well, then there you go. That's why you can't change it.
Yeah. So the thing that you're really getting at here, though, is you've shown them something. And it's pretty much been decided upon.
Yes, it is.
And now you're back actually working on implementing ideas into, like, for reals.
Yes.
And this is where the breakdown occurs.
Yeah.
So let's go back to them with 3 other ideas now. Like, no.
You've had that audience once. That is the only time that you will ever have that audience. And if you change what you have presented to said audience, then... yeah, not good.
Well, you dismantle your reputation at that point.
Well,
but what about this? And it's like, stop wasting my time. This is not what I pay you for.
Again, it's even grander than that.
Oh man. The life of an architect. See, this is it, and I'm assuming though that when you're going through this process, that you have people working on this that did not have the benefit of being in the room, right? Which is kind of what we talked about in the last one.
Not even we were in the room. Like when it was being presented to the client, we weren't even allowed in the room. In fact, half of the team from the actual client's side was not even in the room. Like the people who we have been working with back and forth. So it was
This is a really crappy game of telephone.
Oh my gosh! I mean. This is an interesting way to approach like the final say in the project, the final person to say, yes, your project can proceed. You have funding, all of this other stuff. There's like very few people allowed to be in the room. And it's none of the people that we're working with making the decisions about like all of this. And so then when the heralds bring it in to said person. I don't know if I'm giving anything away yet, but that is when you literally like it is completely out of our hands. It's completely out of their hands, and they'll say yes or no. And if it's yes, then I almost envision them like walking around with a printed out copy of that and saying, holding it up to the final and say, no, you guys did not do what you said you were going to do. How dare you?
You're imagining the worst though.
Hopefully it doesn't. No, but
lay that out there.
But so here we are. I get this input from the people that I'm working directly with. And they give us some pretty good information, and I do some sketches, and they look at the sketches while I'm sitting right in front of them. And they're like, yeah, I think this can work. I'm like, okay, so if this can work, I'll bring it back to the team. I'll explain to the team, what are these changes? They'll say, great, this is fantastic. We'll go ahead and, make these changes. And then I get these drawings sent back to me of like, okay, here's what you sketched up. And it is absolutely the opposite of anything that I sketched up.
Is not what I sketched up. How dare you?
Well, it's not even that. I mean, it honestly isn't even that. It's just like, seriously, this is not what we had discussed. And the problem is that if the client's already looked at it, the design review has already looked at it and said, in earnest, we've accepted this as the way forward, and we can't even get that right.
Now's not the time for new ideas.
Now's not the time for new ideas. Now it's like
typical project manager versus designer. Dynamic right here.
Exactly. It's just like, so
I'm sorry, we're at 98% CDs. Stop it.
I was like, so at what point did you like decide to grow a brain?
Right.
Yeah.
Ouch.
I know, right?
Hey, you're on the same team, people.
I know, right?
Did you see Dune?
I, of course, saw Dune. In fact, I've seen Dune twice.
Oh my God, I'm so jealous right now.
And in fact, now that you've said it, I believe that this weekend could be another Dune.
A third viewing?
Because
I think I need to do this.
My daughter just had her birthday this past weekend. And the only thing that she asked for was, hey, could you get us, mostly her, but wouldn't it be great if we had a projector? I'm like, yeah, it'd be great to have a projector. And
I love it when children have ideas for expensive gifts.
Well, no, but here's why I agreed to it and purchased it, is because I really do feel like this is something that we can all get use out of. I mean, sure. I'm picturing that
this is a total dad mentality.
Oh yeah, it's right? Like, oh,
I bought you this.
It's like, oh,
I bought me this.
It's like, that's a great idea. I personally, I feel like that's fantastic.
You deserve that.
Yeah, exactly. You hit that out of the park. That is a beautiful and brilliant idea. And so, and I even told her, I'm like, look, please be careful with this, because I didn't scrimp on this. This is something that I feel like is something that can, we can mount this in the house. It's one that's like both portable and fixed and stuff. And because she wants to have her friends over and watch horror films out in the backyard with, set up something on the wall of the house and stuff. I'm like, yeah, that all sounds great. And then I'm seeing to myself, wouldn't it be great if I'm watching Formula One as big as I possibly can? Exactly. Where I'm sitting there literally it's the cars are as large as they really are.
All right, but you have to see this film in the theater.
So now,
unless you did the second time.
No, I have not seen the film in the theater yet.
Are missing out.
And I will. In fact, actually, my eldest, now that he's kind of taken some time off and he was just going to work in between his sophomore and junior year of college, decided to go get a job and just started a job at the movie theaters.
Sweet.
See how?
Oh my gosh.
Dad convinced his son to go get job at movie theater so that family can get free tickets. Daughter says, "Hey, I'd like to get a projector." Great idea.
Wow, the stars are aligning.
Exactly.
For your visual.
Exactly. For my viewing pleasure.
Well, the reason I wanted to talk about this is because I think that cinema and maybe music are as close to what architecture can deliver from an experiential standpoint amongst other art forms, you know, and to me, that's when I left the theater after watching this. My 15-year-old was a little bored, but not visually, but just with the story. And I was like, I can't, this should not end. Can this please keep going?
It's like, okay, you said that I saw the title roll and it said part 1.
Right.
Does part 2 start right after this?
Please, and thank you.
Yeah. And then they're just like, oh, well, we announced that part 2 has been greenlit. I'm like, greenlit? No, it should already be in the can.
Seriously. Yeah. Can you please Lord of the Rings this and film them all at the same time? And,
exactly.
That would be better. But now it's a 2-year wait probably. But yeah, I wanted to talk about it from an experiential standpoint because I think, this is what we try to do with architecture. And it's harder to do with architecture, and these buildings have to last a really long time. And it's not to say that this film won't stand the test of time, because it certainly feels like it will.
Yeah.
but it's very different in that way. And so I think, just kind of approaching it from an experiential standpoint about what it delivered to me
Mm-hmm.
is something I have gotten from certain pieces of architecture. Obviously, it's far and few between, but there's ones that you can name, there's buildings that you can name that have given experiences like this. I mean, not the same as this, but like this.
Right.
And this is a full sensory experience. So, I mean,
my gosh.
I didn't taste it, but it was one of those things where this was a masterclass in the art of cinema. And I know it's not an original story. This has influenced tons of other stuff as well. I mean, very, very like one-to-one type influences with George Lucas and Tatooine and the sandworms and all that kind of stuff. But also just like the scale of, we talked about world building on a recent episode, and this was another universe that has been built, that things have been thought through that very few people choose to think through.
Well, so when we were talking about world building, I had already seen the movie and you hadn't yet. And I was I couldn't really start talking about that without like massive spoilers. So I didn't want to do that, but I was just like, this is on a massive scale, world building at its finest, universe building, just like to me, this one now. And I grew up watching the original one, and my dad was a big, huge sci-fi fan and loved the Dune books and everything. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't quite get into them. There was other books that he had on his shelves that, I loved, but it wasn't Dune. But now that I've seen Dune, and in fact, even seen the video that you had, sent me with the interview of Denis Villeneuve, who was who's the director, who was also talking about like certain scenes and the mood that was created. And the mood was created not just by the acting, the music, the lighting, but the architecture. And he kept talking about how the way that he saw this room, this particular scene,
it's like a library.
So this library, and it was a very pivotal scene. And I try my damnedest not to do any spoilers, but maybe we should just say, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen the movie, shut this off, because
just pause it and come back.
Exactly. But it was, he was talking about the reference of him constantly going back to the source material, to the book. And, it was just like, here's how I pictured it when I was a 14-year-old kid, when I read the book back when I was a teenager, to everybody, like his DPs, his, Hans Zimmer. I mean, everybody was going back to the book and saying, what is the mood being created here? What is the feeling? How is the music enhancing the architecture, which I thought was like amazing. Like rooms had their own like feeling, that their own tone, their own music. And it was just wow to all of it.
I'll put a link to that video in the show notes. It was a Vanity Fair video on YouTube where the director breaks down the scene where Paul is brought in to basically be semi-interrogated, right? If not killed, potentially.
By the Reverend Mother. And
right.
It was this, pivotal scene where he's being tested. He's not, everybody thinks he's the one, the chosen one. Which is so interesting that you talk about like the parallels with Star Wars in this. And it was interesting when I was watching it and I'm looking at the scenes of like the chosen one and all these other things and all that other stuff. Like when I never gave the original movie, like I said, because that's my source material, is the original movie, not the
David Lynch.
David Lynch. Thank you. And it was like the David Lynch movie was my benchmark. It wasn't the book, but from, everything that I read, even the David Lynch, even though it was highly edited and he wasn't really happy about how the studio had edited it, it was still trying to stay very true to it. And I actually saw
movies were made very differently back then.
They were. I did, however,
in certain circles, I should say.
Yeah, true.
Because you think about like the way Star Wars was made, it was very different from Hollywood.
True. Well, I mean, he didn't have Hollywood backing, where this one was a studio
on purpose,
right? for that very reason, so that they didn't like, he was the source material, and he was like, I want full control.
He wanted full control, and
they were like, well, if we, so anyway, And so, they kind of went back and forth with checking the book and all of that other stuff. And it's just like, what did the book make me feel like? And I loved how he was trying to stay as true to the source material as possible, but also, bringing his own kind of like vision of all of that. And to kind of have these, and we were talking about, it's just like these overlaps of architecture. And okay, when you're reading the book, you're picturing this room, and how are you picturing this room, and how are you, like, how is your mind's eye setting up the spatial experience that you have?
And I think that, like, just the attention to detail that he gets into about what the details that they actually sweat to figure out what this is incredible. And in that way, I do feel like it's a lot deeper than we give time for on our projects, which are going to last a lot longer than,
right,
2.5 hours in a movie theater. Let's take a moment and talk about the sponsor of this episode. Enscape is a leading real-time rendering and virtual reality tool for the global AEC market. It plugs directly into your modeling software, giving you an integrated design and visualization process. With Enscape, you can render in real time and walk stakeholders through your rendered model with incredible ease. Your buildings can be experienced long before they are built. More than 200,000 unique monthly users from over 150 countries use Enscape to envision better designs. To learn more or to sign up for a free 14-day trial, visit enscape3d.com/Archispeak today. That's enscape3d.com/Archispeak.
So it's interesting. So after going to, after visiting with the client and, sitting down and talking with them and talking about some of the importance that they felt like we were missing in, like, our space planning. It's like, at the time they were, saying that, these are fine. They're well laid out. I mean, the adjacencies are great and all, but there's this missing element. And so, like, really kind of understanding that what we're not doing is, potentially placing other viewers. So we're placing ourselves in this, and we're looking at these spaces, and we see, like, the legitimacy of, like, one adjacency to another and stuff like that. And so I went back and I was just like, okay, how do I explain kind of where they feel like we're a bit disconnected? How do I explain that to the team to kind of, like, really kind of energize them? It's like, all of the work that you've done thus far is great, and it's not really going to change, but there is, like, that next step of evolution to the plans that we really need to. And so we really kind of, like, went back a step and talked about placemaking. And so if you're standing in this corner of the room and you're looking at all of this area, or you're looking down a corridor, I mean, what do you see at the end of the corridor? Is it just a blank wall that then I got to turn the corner? Or is it like our space is punctuated by this emotion, this feeling, this, like, visual impact? And because of the project and because of, the particular client and everything, there is an expectation that is not necessarily the same expectation as we would have with other clients.
And I would just add at this juncture that you've got such a rich cultural and such a visually grounded culture.
Yes.
That's so different than, let's just say, doing a project in Orange County, California.
Exactly.
That there seems to be at least more awareness that is an impact on the types of spaces people see and inhabit every day.
Yes. And so like so we're recording this kind of, like, nearing the end of the week. And so the Monday through Wednesday, I've been in the office with the team, and we've been sitting down, and instead of sitting in front of our computers, we've been sitting in front of a desk with paper and pencil and trace and scales and everything else, and really kind of, like, working through things. And I still have ink marks all over my hands, and I'm sure they do all as well, just from, like, the synergy of talking about these spaces and really kind of getting exciting about placemaking at a greater scale than we probably had been giving it. And it wasn't like we were shifting the project. It was we were making good, nearing great, let's just call it. They were really, really good academic spaces. And they were really good academic spaces that could have been kind of like almost anywhere. In that, exactly what you just said is they aren't just anywhere. They're a very specific place with a very specific style and a very specific culture that is something that is definitely, not our typical project. And so the challenge to be able to understand and embrace that, I think, is finally kind of like sunk in. It's like, oh, really? And then and so we're really trying to kind of like create these spaces. And so back to like Dune is like this library space. Like I'm assuming reading the book, because I already admitted that I did read the book, but assuming that the book really kind of like, it really talks about like the feeling of this room and the emotion of this room, and just like this, talking about the scenes and how the scene was set within kind of like the author's mind's eye. Mm-hmm. I think that is a way to kind of like interestingly bring that layer back to architecture, because it's like how would we explain this? I started talking about a prayer room. I was like, how would we on paper talk about this prayer room in a way that evokes emotion, that in a way that evokes kind of like this sense of feeling this place, this grandeur, this, I'm just, pulling as many words of like just this emotional kind of connection. How do you do that and then turn around and actually create the space, like through drawings, through construction? And
yeah, I know, man. It's and how do you, and that there's definitely an art to that. Part of it is you can definitely achieve that on the computer. It's interesting to kind of talk about the process that you work through and what marks go on the page to convey the kind of information that you're talking about, that is more emotion and less about construct. Or maybe they're intertwined. Definitely, they're definitely related. But being able to dump out a box of colored pencils and draw in perspective and make gestures on a page that evoke different ornamentation or things that would be in the space, or the way the light enters the room, and those kinds of gestures are the kinds of things I think you're talking about, right? It's right. more than just drawing lines that convey a layout in floor plan. It's like it's way more than that, and that to me is what's so interesting about the way he talks about, going back to that scene with the breakdown, about the details and the lighting and the mood and the forced perspective, and the way he tried to convey the way Paul was being controlled by the voice, as right. I mean, right. And to say that sound design in this movie is a huge part of the experience. And that's why I really want you to see it in the theater, is because of the sound design, because it goes to your core, and it is such a huge character of the movie that you can't necessarily get in a home theater setup. It's just like, but the way that he visually and audibly communicated that to go along with what you were just seeing on the screen in 2 dimensions, right?
Right.
And
right.
those are the kinds of things that you're kind of talking about when you're talking about a prayer room, and the kinds of reverence and culture and honor that you want to get into a space like this. Those are very different gestures and words and feelings that you're trying to convey than you are when you're, I don't know, when you're just tackling a more generic space.
Yeah.
It's interesting to think about like all these different layers, right? So they've got, and in the movie he's got the box that he puts the hand in, and there's the needle that she's holding, and there's like the attention to detail, the depth of the focus of the camera, the lighting in the space, the sounds that accompany all of these things, like the way she held the needle, all, the veil over her face and what that means and what that makes you feel about her. Like there's so many pieces to this puzzle. There are so many pieces to this puzzle. That to me, so when I think about it architecturally, like I think about some of the buildings that I've been to, like the Guggenheim in New York, or into John Lautner's, Sheets Goldstein residence,
Mm-hmm.
or, I think really when I think about stuff like what I saw in this movie, I think Carlos Scarpa. Like, I think the attention to detail is incredible. There is such an output of depth that was considered to make space. Right. And that's how I felt when he was just describing this one scene out of a 2.5-hour movie.
Right. Exactly. It was just like, I mean, it was a very important scene, and it was a scene that kind of like, set the tone for the overall movie, but it was a short scene, and it was like was it 20-minute interview, or pretty close to that interview of talking about this one scene, but the everything that went into that scene, it was pretty amazing just to kind of like talk about that, because in a way, that's how that's how we kind of like envision and idealize our, the way that we are going to approach our projects is, we kind of like almost set the scenes and hope that it plays out the way it is. And whether it does or doesn't, that's, we can talk about that differently. But I think that what's interesting about it is just the fact that, it's just they storyboard it out. We cartoon our sets out. They set up like, okay, we create like these mood boards of like, how are the interiors going to feel? And like, here are the CGIs that like, this is like this heroic view that you're going to get when you're standing in this location, looking at this new creation. And when you walk into the building, like here are the procession of feelings that we're hoping to evoke. This is what evokes in us and what we're hoping to evoke in other people. There is so, like when he was talking about storyboarding out from like every perspective, the architecture of the room, the sound design, the lighting, the music, and all of that other stuff. I mean, it really does sound like how we idealize the approach of what we want to do in architecture.
Yeah, I just feel like they're so much better at executing it than we are.
I mean, let's be honest. They've got a slightly better budget than we do, and
they have a better budget, and they are rewarded by spending that time. Whereas I think architecture is just set up very differently. The less time you can spend on a project, the quote unquote better, because that equals more profit, and that doesn't serve that end goal in the way that you're talking about.
Well, I mean, let's do a side-by-side comparison. I have heard about and even seen interviews with Denis Villeneuve, who, like I said, was the director years and years ago, talking about this project for Dune and his name associated with it, and the screenwriting and like just, everything that he's been working on for now years. At least I can easily say that for at least, let's just say 3.5, 4 years. Listen to podcasts, from other filmmakers and stuff like that. And they've all been talking about how they're excited about this vision coming to the screen.
So not different than an architectural project as far as the timeline goes.
Well,
not too different.
But now but he's been in the process of like basically concepting it out for those 4 years, let's just say. Whereas my concept schedule for 8 buildings of a brand new university was like just like
gestation.
Somebody else was like, saying that, hey, I feel like in this big thing that we're doing, that we want to do a university within that thing. And so like there's been other visioning happening previous to us, and then when we get to it, it's just like boom, hit the ground running. And we're just like, so how long do you guys typically need for schematic design for this area? For 8 buildings, 16 weeks. Good.
Oh, ouch. Designed to fail on one level.
I hope not.
Mean, but yeah, right. I know you hope not. And not only that, but then you're further held back by can't see anybody's faces. You can't go to the site. You can't like for quite a bit of time. Like this a very different process.
Well, I will say that a little of this was that whole like COVID thing that just kind of got in the way of us, like physically being able to go and not only go to the site, but also engage with the client, look at like, mock-ups for the type of architecture that they're looking to achieve, and just really kind of like get an understanding of where we're going. And we're there, we're there now. It's just, it could have happened a long time ago. Should have happened a long time ago.
Could have, should have, would have. Yeah. Back to the movie, I just wanted to kind of maybe finish up and talk about the visual worlds that they did create, and just, to me, what they conveyed. I mean, again, like getting back to that feeling of what they were able to create, partially physically, but most of it's CGI, I'm sure, but the how immersive it actually felt because they were so good at what they did. I mean, that feeling of things that have lasted and the permanence of the architecture and the way that it felt ancient. Like it felt like it had been there for such a long time. And I think that was just so well conveyed. It really was monumental and analog, but in many ways still very warm. I mean, it made me think of certain architects like Taro Ando, and things like the visual forms that some of these places took, and the way that the light entered, and the way that they were, the scale of them. I think it was really well thought out.
What was interesting about it, though, is like, this was a vision of a world that was kind of post AI.
Right. There weren't any computers, so the tech was very analog.
Well, I mean, the tech was there, but it wasn't. But it wasn't. It was not, like, in a way we're sort of like subservient to our technology, and it's just the opposite now. It's just like they've had their frustrations with this AI, this kind of like this technology based life, and they're just like kind of going back to the old ways kind of approach.
It had been outlawed, right?
And it had been outlawed.
Because it was like the computers were doing the thinking for the people. People were relying on computers to do the thinking for them. Huh. Yeah. A little social commentary there.
Yeah, no, exactly, right.
And when was this written? In the 60s? I mean,
exactly. I mean, he saw it coming. And it's interesting because, like, I saw some commercial not too long ago, and it's just like, we used to use computers and gaming and all of this other stuff as a way to get away from our reality. Mm-hmm. Now our reality is to get away from all of that other stuff.
The technology, it's just like,
But where I was going with that is, like, it did kind of like set up these feelings of almost nostalgia of spaces. And then, so like every one of these had like a character to them. Some of them were like very, very technology driven, but post technology reliance kind of thing. So you could feel and see the technology, like on the actual planet where Arrakis, where it still has like all of the mining technology and everything else, but it's still kind of almost like manual labor type. Well, not manual labor type mining of spice, but it was. You know what I'm getting. I hope you know what I'm getting. Maybe, I don't know.
It was still very analog and hands-on feeling.
Yes, right? Yes.
Well, I think we give this movie 2 thumbs up, and definitely encourage everyone to go watch it and take it in, because the feels are real. I think that the way that this movie conveyed the built environment is incredible, standing on its own. And to me, that was a huge takeaway. I was kind of like, this is one of the better sci-fi movies in a long, long time. I mean, I put it up there. I'm a huge fan of The Matrix and even Interstellar as a not too long ago example. But I went into all of these with zero expectations and tried to stay away from anything remotely linked to these movies ahead of time. And I just walked out completely blown away. So huge thumb up over here. Well, I hope you can take time out, listeners, to watch this movie away from the digital leashes and distractions that exist in this world, and like just get inspired, because that to me is what I left the theater feeling very inspired, and I couldn't wait to talk to you about it. Thanks to Enscape for their support of this episode. Visit enscape3d.com/Archispeak today for a free 14-day trial. Thanks for listening. This show is part of the Gable Media Podcast Network. See all the shows at gablemedia.com. That's GABLEMEDIA.com. media.com. You can help support what we're doing here by leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts to help get the word out, and don't forget to share it with your friends. We'd love to hear from you, so leave a comment on the website at archispeakpodcast.com, where you can find our entire catalog of shows. Talk to you soon.